Hello and welcome to another episode of PodcastDX, the show that brings you interviews with people just like you, whose lives were forever changed by a medical diagnosis. I'm Lita.
I'm Ron.
And I'm Jean Marie.
Collectively, we're the hosts of PodcastDX. On today's show, we're speaking with Christalle, who is an artist, an advocate, a writer, an adventure seeker. As an entrepreneur diagnosed with epilepsy, Christalle brings a unique perspective of empowerment that inspires others to embrace a positive mindset and live with purpose. When she's not writing or advocating, Christalle enjoys puppy snuggles with her scruffy terrier and outdoor adventures with her husband. Boy, it's a good thing I didn't mix those two up. Christalle will be speaking with us today about epilepsy. Hello, Christalle, and welcome to our show.
Hi, Christalle.
Hi, Christalle.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Christalle, before we get into your symptoms, diagnosis, and your treatment, could you tell our listeners a little bit about epilepsy?
For sure. So epilepsy is a central nervous system disorder, and your brain activity becomes abnormal, causing seizures or periods of unusual behavior, sensations, and sometimes loss of awareness. So you can think of it as an electrical storm in your brain. So your neurons are misfiring, which are causing the disruption.
Okay. That's a great way of visualizing it.
Yeah.
And Christalle, although I've heard about epilepsy before, I personally don't know anyone who actually has this condition. Who does this affect? Can it affect anyone?
It absolutely can. So a lot of people actually don't know this, that anyone can develop epilepsy at any age in their life, any race, male or female, it doesn't matter. It does not discriminate. And there's about 3.4 million people living with epilepsy in the U.S.
Wow.
That's a big number.
Yeah, that is. And Christalle, you mentioned that a seizure is a period of unusual behavior. And I've heard that seizures can result in twitching, body jerking, and those kinds of symptoms. What symptoms do you have when you're having a seizure?
For me, I start feeling like my blood sugar's dropping,
okay.
So hypoglycemia.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll get dizzy, disoriented, and confused. I'll start sweating, but it's like cold sweats. I'm hot and cold at the same time.
Okay.
I get a lot of heat at the base of my skull,
mm-hmm.
and but it looks different for everyone. So it's, as I mentioned, it's caused by abnormal activity in the brain. So depending on where seizures take place in the brain, it can affect people in different ways. So, for example, the Mayo Clinic says there's several signs and symptoms that could be temporary confusion. People can stare off, and it just looks like they're spacing out or daydreaming sometimes. The one that people are most familiar with is the convulsions, the jerking, loss of consciousness, and we'll get into seizures more later, but that's what's called a tonic-clonic, and so that's the one that people usually associate with seizures. And there's even things like psychic symptoms, so deja vu, unprovoked anxiety or fear just can come out of nowhere. So like I said, it just depends on where the activity happens in the brain, what type of seizures people are having, and what causes their seizures is another big part of it.
Focal or generalized seizures?
I think those are two types, right?
Right. What can you tell us about the focal or generalized?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with focal seizures. So when seizures appear to come from abnormal activity in a particular area of the brain, they're called focal, or some refer to them as partial seizures. They fall into two different categories: focal seizures without the loss of consciousness, and also focal seizures with impaired awareness. So let's go back to the loss of consciousness focal seizures. Those used to be called simple partial seizures. They don't cause a loss of consciousness, but they can alter emotions, change the way things look, smell, feel, or taste or sound. They can also result in involuntary jerking of a body part, such as, an arm and a leg, and also spontaneous sensory symptoms such as tingling, dizziness, or flashing lights. And then the focal seizures with impaired awareness, those used to be called complex partial seizures. Those seizures involve a change or loss in consciousness or awareness. During a complex partial seizure, you may stare into space. So again, it may look like someone's daydreaming. They don't typically respond, and they have repetitive movements. So, smacking their lips, chewing, swallowing. They might pick on their clothes or, walk in a circle. Sometimes focal seizures can be confused with other neurological disorders, such as a migraine, narcolepsy, or even mental illness. And then the other type is generalized seizures, and that's what I have. So generalized seizures don't happen in one particular area of the brain. They happen all over. So people that have generalized seizures aren't typically candidates for surgery, a lobectomy in particular, because they can't remove your entire brain, obviously.
Yeah, that would not be fun.
Not a good.
They used to do
not
that
a
in
good,
Egyptian times,
right?
and
right.
yeah.
Not a good remedy.
So generalized seizures, there's a few different types of seizures that fall into that category. Absent seizures, so those used to be called petit mal seizures. Recently, well, not too recently, but pretty recently, the language has changed revolving around seizures. So it's important, to keep updated on the different labels. So no longer petit mal seizures. We call them absent seizures now. And those look like daydreaming, subtle eye movement, blinking, or lip smacking. And they usually occur in clusters, and they cause a very brief loss of awareness, sometimes less than a second. It can be really difficult to catch sometimes.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people, they'll think their kids are just daydreaming in class or something, but it can sometimes be an absent seizure, which is, as we know, is a little more serious.
Oh, yeah.
So tonic seizures, they cause stiffening of the muscles, and they usually affect your back, arms, legs, and then you'll fall to the ground because you can't control your muscle movement. Similar to not being able to control the movement, atonic seizures are just the opposite. So instead of the muscle stiffening, your muscles actually, you lose loss of movement and control of them. So you just fall to the ground. Some people call them drop seizures as well. And then clonic seizures are associated with repeated jerking of muscle movements. They usually affect the neck, face, and arms. And myoclonic, which that's another type I have, is a sudden jerk. So, for example, you could be sitting at the table eating, and you pick up your fork, and all of a sudden your arm just jerks away from you, and you lose control of the muscles. And the tonic-clonic seizures, like I said, that's the one that most people are familiar with. They're the biggies. You fall, lose consciousness. They used to be called grand mal seizures. So if you're not familiar with the term tonic-clonic, just like the petit mal seizures, the name has been updated. So now tonic-clonic seizures, and they look very dramatic. The person will fall to the ground. They'll be unconscious. Sometimes their eyes will roll in the back of their head. Their whole body is convulsing, and they let out what is sometimes what is called the scream in the epilepsy community. So that is air escaping from your body, and it can cause sounds to come out of the person. And it's really important to keep an eye on the people if they are experiencing a tonic-clonic seizure, because they can injure themselves, and they can also bite their tongue or the interior of their mouth.
Wow. Okay. Well, I would have to say that epilepsy is far more complicated than I ever imagined. Christalle, when did your symptoms start?
My story is a little bit complicated. My timeline is. So my first documented seizure was at the age of 13. But I do remember having seizures prior to that. I was just so young and didn't know what epilepsy or seizures were, and so I didn't know to tell anyone. Mm-hmm. But I remember I used to lie on the kitchen floor because of the cool tile, and anytime I started feeling the symptoms coming on, in the refrigerator, they had fans underneath them back then, and they would blow the air out. And so I would
Okay.
just lay on the tile floor and have the air blow on me. But like I said, I would start feeling sweaty, disoriented, confused. I would get irritable and weak, like my sugar was dropping, to mimic signs of hypoglycemia. But first documented seizure at 13, walking down the beach with my dad. So it was a very interesting experience. I actually lost eyesight for a few minutes. My body went into shock. It was definitely one of the most drastic seizures I've ever had. But I'm really lucky after that experience and after getting diagnosed later, I have what are called auras, which is a warning sign that the seizure is about to happen. And a lot of people in the epilepsy community or in the seizure community aren't that lucky to have auras. So I have a few minutes that I know I get my little aura, my warning sign. For me, it's just a weird sensation in my brain. It's almost like it's similar to, I guess the closest thing would be deja vu. And so I know that a tonic-clonic is coming. And so I have time to get to a safe place and sit down before it happens. And a lot of people aren't that lucky. So.
Yeah, that is great. And maybe it also could be a blip in the matrix. Sorry, that was a very bad joke. Christalle, how is epilepsy treated, and what treatments have you tried and have they been effective for you?
So there's not currently a cure for epilepsy. So the best thing we can do is manage our epilepsy and the symptoms to decrease the seizure activity as much as possible.
Okay.
The best advice I can give to people is to know about your condition. Educate friends and family members about your condition. Take your seizure medication as prescribed. If you miss a dose, it can cause you to have a seizure. So if you miss a dose, it's great to immediately take it upon remembering. But other things you can do are check with your healthcare provider before taking any other medications or supplements that may interact with your anti-epileptic medications.
Mm-hmm.
Keep a record of your seizures and your seizure triggers to help track the patterns. It'll help you just through trial and error learn what your triggers are so you can better manage your seizures. And then sleep is very important for someone with epilepsy. Lack of sleep can actually trigger seizures.
Oh.
So it's really important to keep on I keep on a sleep schedule. So I try to go to bed at the same time every night and wake up around the same time every morning. So get at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep each night to feel rested and to help decrease seizures. And then exercise. We all know it produces endorphins, which is going to make you feel better anyway, but it's also going to help you get a better night's sleep, and it's going to help you just stay healthier in general and be a more active person with epilepsy, because it's easy to get isolated with the condition. So you could, join an exercise group. A lot of people are into Zumba right now.
Oh, yeah.
You could do something like that, right, at your community center. And then part of being healthy is always a balanced diet and doing what works best for you, whether that's, just eating a well-rounded healthy diet or doing something like the ketogenic diet that has been proven to help with seizures, whatever that healthy diet looks like to you and helps you to avoid your food triggers. And then, of course, no tobacco, no alcohol excessively, or other substances. I know a few people that do drink that have epilepsy. For me personally, it's not worked out in my favor. Even a drink or two, I find myself having symptoms and feeling a seizure coming on. So I just stay away from it completely, but doctors have said, a drink or two won't hurt. So that's specific to each individual, I think. And then a decreased stress, and I think part of decreasing stress is having a strong support system.
Oh, sure.
Whether that be friends, family, even coworkers, or a local support group, which you can find through the Epilepsy Foundation's website. And then always talk to your healthcare provider about any concerns that you have in regards to epilepsy. I mean, if your medication is making you feel weird, it's really important for us to speak up and be our own advocates and talk to our doctors about what is coming up for us, because like I said, epilepsy is very specific to the individual, and we all have different causes and symptoms can vary. So just, be an advocate for yourself, speak up, talk to your doctor, talk to your family, talk to others with epilepsy. If you don't feel like your family's understanding you, they may have a different perspective since they live with the condition. And just be open to trying new things. A lot of different treatments work for different people. Different medications even work for different people. So find what works for you and work with your doctor to do that, because according to the Epilepsy Foundation, medication can control seizures for 7 out of 10 people living with epilepsy. So
wow.
That's a good number.
Yeah.
Right?
Very
and
encouraging.
If finding that medication is what's going to do it for you, then that's what you should do, and feel supported by your family and your doctor in the process.
Mm-hmm.
For me, medication was not the answer, but I don't believe that it doesn't work for others. Since epilepsy is unique, symptoms can vary from person to person. It's important that patients work with their neurologist or epileptologist if they see a specialist to find treatment that works best for them. The ketogenic diet and CBD are what's working for me, but I've also tried the modified Atkins diet in the past, which is it's a less strict version of the ketogenic diet. You're counting net carbs instead of full carbs, and the ratios of fat aren't as drastic. So that's what's been working for me so far, and I haven't been on medication for 10 years now, so that's pretty exciting. Yeah.
So the medication that you were taking when you first started, did it have too many side effects, or it just wasn't working?
My personality completely changed. That was the first thing I noticed. My quality of life decreased. I was sick all the time from nausea. I would have migraines and headaches. My husband, he tells me he doesn't even recognize the person I was at that time.
Oh, wow.
And in addition to that, it increased my seizures. So that was
that's a bad side effect.
I have heard on, when you're listening to side effects on the news, or not on the news, on the advertisements, it's like, okay, here's a good medication for a migraine, and one of the side effects is it could cause migraine. I'm like, wait a minute.
Right.
How on earth?
I had a prescription once that the first side effect was death. Could cause death. And I thought, that's not good.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah, that's not what I'm going to want to take.
No. What kind of a doctor do you see for epilepsy? Is it a typical GP?
Well, at first you probably would see a GP, and then once you explain your symptoms, they would probably recognize the signs of a seizure, and then they would recommend you to a neurologist or a specialist in epilepsy, which is an epileptologist. So that's just a neurologist that specializes in epileptic disorders.
Okay.
Christalle, I don't think we've asked this question to you yet, but what does cause epilepsy, if anything at all?
There's no particular cause. So sometimes it can be an accompaniment to another disorder. So that's something that doctors would be able to say, okay, you had a stroke, then you have seizures afterwards. So that would be a tie. But if someone just has epilepsy with no identifiable cause, which is about half of those with the condition, the other half may be traced, like I said, to various factors. So if it's not accompanied by another disorder or, for example, after stroke, then it could be a genetic influence. So some types of epilepsy are categorized by the type of seizures you experience or the part of the brain that's affected. That can run in families, and in the genetic influence cases, it's likely to come from, the parent or be in the family in other places. So researchers have actually linked some of the types of epilepsy to specific genes, but for people, genes are only a part of the cause. So certain genes may make a person more sensitive to environmental conditions, and that can trigger seizures. So other things that can cause it are head trauma.
Oh.
So if you've been in a car accident, maybe a sports injury, which is, a great reason to wear a helmet when riding a bicycle.
Absolutely.
Put on your seatbelt when you get in the car, because you want to do everything you can to avoid these types of injuries. And if you do experience a head injury, a concussion, for example, which is big in sports, you want to go get medical care as soon as possible to make sure that it doesn't turn into something more serious.
Sure.
Another thing is brain conditions. So brain conditions, as I mentioned, a stroke. Another one is brain tumors or anything in the brain that can cause epilepsy, but a stroke is the leading cause of epilepsy in adults over the age of 35. So that's why I use that one as an example, because it is one of the most known causes of epilepsy is people that have had stroke over the age of 35. So another one, infectious diseases. So if you've had meningitis or if you have AIDS, another one is encephalitis. So that is it can cause smoothing of the brain. An infection called you guys, I can't even say this one.
That's okay.
Oh my gosh.
That's okay.
Yeah, you're right.
Cysticercosis?
Cysticercosis?
Yeah, we'll all take a stab at it.
What Ron said. I'm gonna get that one.
He put a hard C on one of them.
Cysticercosis.
That's not good. I'll take that one.
Cysticercosis. Okay. Yeah. Wow. A mouthful.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going to say the
infection. Right.
But epilepsy can be caused by an infection, which is caused by a parasite. So it's mostly found in third world type countries. So it's through bacteria, if you aren't practicing good hygiene.
Okay.
So it in a clean house, you're typically not going to have things like that. But it can also be caused by if you eat undercooked bacon, for example.
Wow.
It can cause So
that got my attention.
That got his attention.
Right? I know, bacon. But so again, typically though, that's not going to happen in most places in the U.S. But if you are traveling, that's definitely something to keep in mind if you're visiting other countries.
Or for our listeners,
yes,
right.
Yeah,
we have listeners all over the world, and you never know, what the conditions will be.
Exactly. So people in those areas, they definitely want to take that stuff into consideration. Another thing is prenatal injury that can cause epilepsy. So that's something that happens before birth. Babies are sensitive to brain damage and can be caused by several factors, like inadequate nutrition, if there's an infection, or oxygen deficiencies, because lack of oxygen to the brain is essentially what causes epilepsy. So this brain damage will definitely result in epilepsy or cerebral palsy, which a lot of people with cerebral palsy have epilepsy. The last thing I want to mention is developmental disorders. So epilepsy can be associated with developmental disorders such as autism or neurofibromatosis. And I know many kids in the epilepsy community that have both epilepsy and autism. So it's always a good thing to keep that in mind. If your child does have autism, to get them checked to make sure. And as far as I know, in my case, mine is genetic. So I go back to the very first possibility that we discussed. I have checked my health records, checked with my parents, my grandparents, and I have never had any type of physical trauma that could cause me to have epilepsy or seizures. I do have other family members that have seizures as well, such as my great aunt on my mother's side. and then my great uncle on my father's side. So,
so both sides.
yeah, as far as I know, it's genetic, and I'm just one of those lucky people.
Well, Christalle, can you tell us, how do you feel like before? You were saying like you have that aura, and then during, and then after a seizure.
Yeah.
Is it? I think I'd like to know. Is it something that's painful?
It depends. So it can be painful if you injure yourself, but the actual seizure itself isn't painful.
Okay.
So for me, like I said, I have an aura. So the best way I can describe it to people that don't have epilepsy is like a deja vu feeling. But I just call it, I feel weird.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels weird. So it's just like an overwhelming feeling that something's about to happen almost. But then the feeling of deja vu combined with that.
Okay.
And then I'll have, I will say sometimes it is associated with like a tingling in my head, but that doesn't happen all the time. So then I'll start having the feelings of hypoglycemia. So like my blood sugar's dropping, I'll get sweaty, I'll get disoriented, confused, I get weak. And so I usually try to sit down. Sometimes I'll try to put my legs up against the wall because that helps to keep the blood from, rushing from my head. And I've gotten to where I just try to calm down and focus on my breath and just kind of, I used to fight it. I used to think, okay, here it comes, and seizures come in, and I'd be like, brace myself. But all that was doing for me was building more anxiety. And so now I've kind of started just surrendering to it and giving into it. The older I get, the less I want to fight it and just kind of accept it. So if I black out and have a tonic-clonic, I usually, I'm not going to know what happens after that, right? So I don't know about the convulse. I know I convulse. I know I get tunnel vision, right? And so I know I'm going to black out, but I don't know what happens. But after that, so when I come to, there's this period which is called the postictal stage. And during that stage, you're still very confused and out of it. They compare having a seizure to running a marathon. It's just all your muscles are just clenched so tight, and then all of a sudden they just give up, when the seizure's over. And so it's like you did a really crazy workout or you ran a marathon, you just went full speed at something that, you're just giving your all to, and then your body just collapses. And so when you come to your body still exhausted, and your mind hasn't really figured out what's happened yet. And so you have this bit of brain fog. And so it usually takes, if I have a tonic-clonic, it usually takes me a few days to a week to fully recoup and feel like myself again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the recovery is a lot longer than I think most people really realize. Yeah, but like I said, there's so many different things that can happen for people with seizures. So I want to share some of those that I might not experience myself, but others will experience depending upon the types of seizures they have. Mm-hmm. So some of those may be strange, negative, or scary feelings. So just like I said, I feel like something's going to happen that may be associated with fear or panic feelings. Some people have the opposite, and they have totally pleasant feelings, and it's a euphoric feeling, and just everything's great.
Wow.
Bam.
Yeah. That's nice.
That's kind of scary in itself to me, because to go from such a place of euphoria to then experience the seizure,
okay,
that's kind of crazy, right? It's a bit of a roller coaster ride if you think about it. Some other things are racing thoughts, which, anxiety can bring those on as well. And a lot of people with epilepsy do experience anxiety. As I mentioned, deja vu. So that is a feeling that you have been somewhere, but you haven't been there. So say I go to a certain store and then I feel like, I've been here before, right? Mm-hmm. We've all had that feeling at some point, but for people with epilepsy, that can actually be a sign of a trigger or of a seizure or an aura. Another one is jamais vu, and that's similar to deja vu, but it's a feeling that something is unfamiliar even though it isn't. So it's basically the opposite. So in addition, people can feel and think that their body parts look different. So they may, I've actually experienced this, and it's pretty weird. It's kind of like Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, okay. Okay.
When she drinks or she eats, and she gets bigger and smaller,
Right.
same kind of thing. So sometimes you feel like your leg or one of your limbs or your hand or foot is actually bigger than it is. It's really weird. And that, I feel like that one's a hard one to explain to people, but it's just the strangest sensation, because you'll see, your rest of your body's in proportion, but then you just look at one part of your body and it's bigger than the rest. It's creepy. Some people even have like an out of body feeling, or you may have more physical warning symptoms. So like I said, feeling hot, or having like cold sweat, something like that, looking pale or flushed, your heart races, you may feel dizzy or lightheaded. A lot of people experience nausea. That's something I do experience, but it's not every seizure. So that's one that comes and goes for me. Other feelings are like your stomach is rising from your stomach to your throat, or you may perceive things differently. So headache or pain in the body, you may experience numbness, tingling, or even feeling like an electric shock type feeling in part of your body. A lot of people will have unusual smells or sounds or tastes. They can experience vision loss, blurry vision, or even seeing light or things that are not really there. And some people experience hearing loss, or hearing strange or different sounds.
But that's a temporary hearing loss, correct?
Yeah, temporary hearing
Okay.
loss. So it's like it just shuts out. I've had friends tell me they'll hear like a ringing as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different symptoms that can occur for warning signs.
It certainly sounds like it.
Yeah.
And I understand that there are alerting devices that you could wear. Would it be a wearing thing, or like a piece of jewelry?
Watch almost.
Yeah, there are. There's some that are like watches,
okay,
that you can just wear around your wrist. There's others. One that I currently use is called Seizure Link, and that one, it attaches to your bicep. So it almost looks like an insulin pump. It's about this same size, a little bit smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it just uses like a hydrogel patches to attach to your skin.
Mm-hmm.
So that one, in the watch one that I spoke about, it just picks up sensations that triggers it, that alerts it that you're having a seizure. And both of those devices, they have apps that accompany them, and they'll alert your caregivers, which is amazing, because if you're unconscious and having a seizure,
right.
it's going to be a little difficult.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's hard to use a phone.
Amazing.
So I really technology has just made this process so much easier, and it's improving every day. I mean, every new device that comes out is more accurate, and so it's really cool to watch the evolution of these things. But there's still other things you can do, like there's mats that go under the mattress that will alert parents if their children are having a seizure. There's like baby monitors is another thing people use. So there's definitely a lot of different devices that people can use to monitor their seizures. But I like the Seizure Link because it specifically detects tonic-clonic seizures, which is typically what I have when I have seizures. And it has been the most accurate device I've used so far.
Okay.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that is. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Christalle, since I don't know anything about I've never known anyone with seizures. If I came across someone that was having, let's say, a tonic-clonic seizure, what would I do
Or any
to help some? Well, I mean, if it's just a staring seizure, I guess you just sit with them. But I mean,
yeah, there's different things you can do for different seizures. But yeah, tonic-clonic, like I said, those are the big ones where people can typically injure themselves the most. So think about, you said the tonic was the stiffness of the muscles, and the atonic is when they lose muscle control completely, and so they drop. And so that will give you some idea of what a tonic-clonic looks like, because you have the stiffening and the relaxing of the muscles. And so the tonic-clonic and tonic and atonic seizures, those are the ones you need to really worry about. So if someone's having a tonic-clonic, first thing is, has this person ever had a seizure before?
That's
so, like, if
question.
if it's like you ask them, is this the first time?
Well, or if they have a medical alert bracelet, or if someone with them knows.
Right. And so if any of these things occur, you want to call 911. So if they haven't had a seizure before in their life, and there's no other cause that you know of, you definitely want to call 911, right?
Okay, sure.
So, but if someone has epilepsy and has tonic-clonic seizures, often you don't always have to call an ambulance. So I'll talk about that a little more in a minute.
Okay.
But regardless if they've had a seizure or not, if the person has difficulty breathing or waking up from the seizure, or the seizure has lasted longer than 5 minutes, you absolutely want to call an ambulance. Okay. Because these seizures, these are the type that they can hurt themselves during the seizures as well. So if there's an injury, you want to call an ambulance.
Sure, for sure.
Right? Yeah. And then another big one is, are they in the water when they've had the seizure? If they're in water, which, first of all, no one with epilepsy should swim alone. Always have a partner with you, because if something happens, you have no way, no one will know what happened. So always have somebody swim with you. But if they're in the water, you want to call an ambulance, because they've probably inhaled some water, and you want to make sure that they are breathing okay and that they haven't done further damage to themselves. Or if the person has a health condition like diabetes or heart disease, or especially if they're pregnant, because not only would they hurt themselves, but they could hurt the baby as well. So most seizures will end within a few minutes, under 5 minutes typically. So if the person has epilepsy, that's one thing to keep in mind, is if the seizure is longer than 5 minutes, like I said, call an ambulance. But if this is something that happens all the time for them, you also want to check, do they have rescue meds on them? Like you said, do they have a medical bracelet or necklace, or even check their wallet, because I carry a medical card in my wallet as well, just in case someone looks there and doesn't recognize my bracelet.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but if it's under 5 minutes and they do have epilepsy and they seem to be getting enough oxygen, there's not much you can do during the seizure to really help them. Just protect their head. You want to make sure they're not hitting their head on anything. My husband, for me, this is helpful for me, and I'm sure it is for others. He just, even though I'm not always conscious, he'll just talk to me and just kind of rub my arm just to reassure me and let me know that he's there. So when I do come out of it, there's a face that is friendly and that I know I'm being taken
sweet.
care of.
Yeah, that's great.
Because I think a lot of people are scared of epilepsy because they don't understand it. And so I myself have been in situations where people don't help you, and that can be really terrifying when you come out of a seizure. So I think in addition to calling 911, just be there. Just let them know it's okay. Reassure them. I think that's a big part of it that a lot of people don't do, because the situation can be terrifying, so stay with them until the seizure ends. Make sure he or she's fully awake. After it ends, like I said, just reassure them, help them sit up and get to a safe place. make sure they're alert and can communicate, which that can take a few minutes, depending on how bad the seizure was. Comfort them. And we talked about the medical bracelet. Make sure to check that.
Should you offer them something to drink, or is it a choking hazard at this point, or?
Sometimes it depends what causes the seizure. In my opinion, because like I said, hypoglycemia. Not only do I experience those symptoms, but that is actually a seizure trigger for me, which is why I ended up giving up sugar because of it. But so if someone, if their blood sugar dropped, of course you want to get them something to get their blood sugar back up. Most people do orange juice or something like that. So in that case, absolutely. But you want to make sure the person is coherent and communicating well enough to really understand what's going on before you give them anything.
Okay.
Because sometimes it can take people a while to come to. So depending on how bad and how long the seizure was, you just want to make sure you give them enough time to get back to themselves.
Sure.
And if the person is alone, it's always a great idea to call a taxi or, a Lyft or Uber, whatever you use, and make sure that they get home safely, because a lot of people with epilepsy don't drive. You don't know them. Maybe you could even offer them a ride home if you're a nice person, right? help them into the taxi, help them onto the bus, however they're getting around. Because even when you do come to, you might still be a little confused, and it might take a little bit for the brain fog to go away.
Right.
I'm sure.
That's some great information. Thank you for sharing it. For you personally, Christalle, what's been the hardest part of having epilepsy?
For me, it's definitely the lack of education and awareness. There's so much social stigma surrounding epilepsy, and it really breeds fear in our communities. And I really think that's been the most difficult part for me. I talk so openly about it that I sometimes forget how close-minded others are surrounding the issue.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So that's been one of my passions, is just helping to educate people. I mean, it's such a common disorder. I know we said 3.4 million in the U.S. have it, but it's about 65 million people worldwide that have epilepsy.
Wow.
And it's crazy to me that more people aren't speaking out and just sharing their stories and educating the public about this disorder, because I really feel that that's the only way we can break the stigmas associated with epilepsy. And not just people with epilepsy, but their caregivers, their family and friends and coworkers, anyone that has been affected by it, because it just consumes all areas of a person's life, and that includes the people surrounding them. So when the stigmas exist, I feel like it doesn't only hurt the epilepsy community, but it causes those with epilepsy to feel even more isolated. It can affect their self-esteem, and it adds to feelings of depression and anxiety that many people with epilepsy face. So, we just want to feel accepted, supported, and quote unquote normal, like everybody else.
For sure.
So I think just being open and honest and starting conversations and educating people, that will get us there. That's the way to make it happen.
And thank you for taking the time to do that with us today, because, every time you reach out, you're helping everyone learn a bit more. And definitely education is the amazing way to go. Fantastic. Christalle, what additional tips, hints, or helpful advice do you have for our listeners?
I think the biggest thing I can tell people is learn your triggers. Know what is causing your seizures. For me, that took a lot of trial and error. It's a long process, and I still feel like I might not know all of them, but I'm very, very close to knowing them all. So if you know things are causing triggers, step away from them. It's not always an easy decision, but some things that I've noticed that can trigger seizures for me, and for others I've talked to through, social media and just support groups and things like that are stress and anxiety or any type of emotional stress or issues. A lot of people with epilepsy have anxiety. I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. A lot of people without epilepsy have a lot of anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
So I really feel like that's just becoming part of our culture now. So I think, talk about what's on your mind, get it out. And, like I said, finding a support group and support system will help you get through that. But knowing that stress is a trigger, try to decrease it as much in your life as possible and find whatever it is that helps you do that. For
meditation.
Me, it's nature.
Nature, yes.
Yes, meditation, absolutely. Love meditating. And whatever it is. I mean, some people, they like to go, say, to the batting cages or something, whatever gets that stress out for you. And then alcohol or drug abuse. I mentioned, I don't drink because it is a very apparent seizure trigger for me. And I know when I got diagnosed, the 3 things my doctor said was, okay, your 3 biggest triggers are alcohol, lack of sleep, and stress.
Oh.
So, yeah, so those are the biggies for people to watch out that are usually going to trigger a seizure. Another, like I mentioned, sleep. So I said I try to stick to a schedule. I think that's very important just to kind of train your body into knowing when it's time to go to sleep and when it's time to wake up, and making sure you get that full 7 to 8 hours every night.
Crystal, what do you do if you're traveling? Like jet lag, if you're traveling a far distance.
If I'm traveling or if just having a hard time getting to sleep in general, I take a magnesium supplement. Magnesium, yeah, it's great for relaxing your body and your muscles.
Okay.
So what I'll do is, the one I take is called Calm, and it's just a powdered supplement. So you just put about a tablespoon or so in a cup of water, and I would drink that, and then I put on meditation music on my phone or YouTube or whatever, Spotify, and then I just try to lay in my bed and kind of meditate myself to sleep.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. It's wonderful that you found what works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know different things will work for different people. I know people that have to take Ambien, and that's what works for them. So everybody's different, that's the important thing, is finding what works for you and your body. And then if you have a change in medication, that can sometimes be a trigger. So it's really important to work with your doctor through that process. Be very open and honest about how the medication is affecting you, because sometimes it might be as simple as just tweaking the dosage, so making sure you do that, and then you also adhere to your medication schedule, because skipping or missing a dose of medication can trigger a seizure. So it's very important that you take your medication on time, as prescribed, and stick to a schedule with that. Another thing is overstimulation. And this one's a big one for me. I've noticed the quieter my life gets, the more sensitive I am to being overstimulated when I go out in public. Yeah. So flashing lights can be a trigger for people with photosensitive epilepsy. And so that's about 3% of the epilepsy population. But it still is a trigger. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. There are glasses that people with epilepsy can wear that will help decrease their reaction to the flashing light. So to help prevent trigger seizures. So that's something if they do have, so if they have those types of seizures, and I don't think they've been out on the market too long. And I've talked to a few people that have used them, and they really help. So that's definitely something to check out if you have photosensitive seizures. And then there's things like, when the flashing lights happen in TV or movies or video games or computer games, just be aware of any seizure warnings before they happen, before you play the game. I know my husband, Yeah, my husband and I are totally nerds, and we still play video games. And almost every game, there's a warning, but I don't have photosensitive seizures, so I don't have to worry about that. Mm-hmm. But usually the game will tell you, so just be aware of that, especially with kids, because they might not know to look for it, but adults will. And then hormonal changes in women. So elevation in hormones can actually trigger seizures. So just be careful around, like during your cycle, to make sure that you're getting maybe a little more extra sleep, or, you know, you're doing things to support your body to help decrease those seizures. And then mental strain is another one. I don't think many people know about this, but if people are, I guess this would kind of tie back to stress too, mental strain, such as from solving complex problems, and this could be, you know, just everyday life problems, whatever is complex to them, that can actually be a seizure trigger as well. And so I think that ties back to stress and anxiety combined with the mental strain. But I really believe, above everything, triggers, trial and error, keeping a journal, whatever you do, mindset is everything. And I think accepting your diagnosis is a part of the process, and it happens for different people at different times. But it's important to remember, no matter what stage you are in your diagnosis process, acceptance process, whatever it is, remember that your attitude dictates your outlook. If you feel you're a victim to your diagnosis, you will be. I used to feel that way, and it took a lot to get out of that spot, but through support and building a community and educating myself more about epilepsy, I have never felt more empowered than the day I finally accepted to embrace my diagnosis.
That's
and
excellent.
Live my best life. Yeah. So.
Well, Christalle, thank you ever so much for joining us today. How can people find out more about you and epilepsy? Do you share your story on social media?
I do. So the most active platform I'm on is definitely Instagram. Okay. So you can follow my journey, learn more about my advocacy, writing, my travels, and I'm at Christalle Bodiford on Instagram and CrystalleBodiford.com on the web. And then Facebook is Creative Epilepsy Advocate. Oh. And then on Twitter, which I'm pretty new to Twitter, I just joined at the beginning of the year, so still easy good to that. But you can find me at Christalle Art on Twitter.
Okay, and we'll have links to all of those accounts on our website as well.
Definitely. Yes, we'll put links up there. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for having me. This was so much fun. I really appreciate the opportunity to educate your audience and share a little bit about my epilepsy.
For sure. Thank you. If our listeners have any questions or comments related to today's show, they can contact us at PodcastDX@yahoo.com, through our website, PodcastDX.com, on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, or Instagram.
And if you have a moment to spare, please give us a review wherever you get your podcast. As always, keep in mind that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment and before undertaking a new healthcare regime. And never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast.
Till next week.